Well, hello and welcome, and you've reached a bit of a milestone because we've reached the beginning of the New Testament. Slightly different this time is before launching straight into looking at the Gospel account of Matthew, I'd like to do an introduction to the Gospels and to consider both their writing and their purpose. By way of a short introduction, let's consider what these Gospels were and why they were written. According to a very long established practice, the first 4 books of the New Testament are known as the Gospels. This is probably because they record the gospel, or the good news, that's what the term means, of the coming of Jesus Christ, the Saviour of the world. Each of the 4 gospel writers had their own particular special purpose in writing their book, and they selected and used the material accordingly. Each gave their own emphasis to teaching and events taken from the life of Christ, according to the purpose of their particular book. Each gospel writer wrote it for different people. People who came from different countries, different cultural backgrounds, even different racial and religious backgrounds. Yet there is no disagreement in the picture of Jesus Christ they describe. All 4 declare He is divine and human, Lord of all and Saviour of all people. These gospel accounts are not just straightforward biographies of Jesus, and they make no attempt to give detailed or even chronological accounts of Jesus' life. Nevertheless, they give all the facts that people need to know in order to believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and so that they may have life through Him. Taken together, the 4 gospel accounts present a picture of all the main periods of Jesus' life. These 3 periods are His early childhood, His public ministry, in other words His teaching, His healing and His miracles, etc., and then finally, of course, His death, burial and resurrection. So after Jesus' ascension, we then see that the very beginnings of the disciples beginning the task of spreading the good news of His salvation that Jesus had brought. As the years pass, the church is seen to grow, and those who have seen and heard Jesus become fewer in number and more widely scattered. So in order to preserve what the actual witnesses taught about Jesus, people began to prepare written accounts of the things Jesus said and Jesus did. It is in this sort of activity we see the origins of these 4 gospel accounts, the first of which was probably written as early as AD 60 and the last written only in AD 90. It seems that Mark's Gospel was the first to be written. Mark had assisted the Apostle Peter in missionary work that took them through the north of Asia Minor and eventually even brought them to Rome. When Peter left to go on further journeys, Mark remained for a while in Rome. The Roman Christians asked Mark to write down the story of Jesus as they had just heard it from Peter, and the result is that he wrote a book that we today know as Mark's Gospel. Over the years, Luke had also been taking notes and had been preparing an account of the life of Jesus. Luke gathered material from Paul as well as from other people living in early Palestine who had heard and seen Jesus, actual eyewitnesses to Him. When he arrived in Rome, he met with Mark, and he also took some of Mark's material and added it to his own, to bring his own account, the Gospel of Luke, to completion. Whereas Mark wrote for a group of Christians, Luke wrote for someone who is probably not a Christian. The person named in the introduction is someone called Theophilus, who appears to have been a government official of some importance, and Luke's purpose was to give him and others a trustworthy account of the origins of Christianity. Luke's account was so long that in our current Bible it is divided into 2 books. The first covers the events, which is why it's called a gospel, because it covers the actual events from the birth of Jesus to His death, resurrection and ascension, and is that today we know as Luke's Gospel. The second part, which covers the events after Jesus' ascension right through to Paul's arrival in Rome, we today know as the Acts of the Apostles. Now, the Gospel of Matthew appears to have been written about 10 years after the Gospels of Mark and Luke. Matthew's concern was to produce an account of Jesus' ministry that was especially suited to the needs of Christians of Jewish background. His book shows a particular interest in the fulfillment of God's purpose concerning Israel's Messiah and the responsibility of the Messiah's people, in other words the church, to spread his message to the Gentiles. Matthew includes much of Mark's material in his own book. In fact, about 90% of Gospel of Mark is contained or found within the longer Matthew Gospel. The fourth Gospel, the Gospel of John, is different both in form and style from these other three Gospels. This book was probably written in the last decade of the first century, by which time the other three Gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark and Luke, were very well known. Although John follows the same general development of the story, from Jesus' baptism to his resurrection, his purpose was not to produce another narrative account of Jesus' life and ministry. He wanted to instruct people in basic Christian truth concerning not just who Jesus was, but what he meant and what he meant for the world. The reason John wrote his gospel was that in the region where he lived, which was probably Ephesus, people were confused because of the activity of these false teachers who were appearing. Some of these teachers denied that Jesus was fully divine, and others said that he was not fully human. John is seen to oppose these teachings in his writing, but his chief reason for writing is not negative. He wants to lead people to see Jesus as the Son of God and so to find true life through him. Much of John's Gospel consists of teaching, and most of this teaching comes from the recorded words of Jesus himself.